first man to call Muhammad a prophet was a Christian. The Bible he studied contains a sentence, written 5 centuries earlier, that curses any angel who preaches a contrary gospel. This film asks what that sentence means for the angel Waraka endorsed. In the last film, we found that the first human being to call Muhammad a prophet was a Christian. His name was Waraka ibn Nawfal. He recognized Muhammad by analogy to Moses, using the Bible he had spent his life studying and translating. But that same Bible contains a sentence, a single sentence written more than 5 centuries before Muhammad was born. And that sentence describes, with uncanny precision, exactly the kind of event Waraka was being asked to endorse. It does not bless it, it pronounces a curse. A brief recap for those joining the series here. In the year 610, Muhammad came down from the cave of Hira terrified, believing he might be possessed. Neither the angel nor Allah pronounced him a prophet. His wife Khadija comforted him, but did not name him one either. The first human being to do so was her cousin, Waraka ibn Nawfal. And here is what matters for this film. The Islamic sources are emphatic about why Waraka's word carried weight. He was not a random relative. He was a scholar of scripture. By the tradition's own account, Waraka had converted to Christianity. He had studied the scriptures. According to Sahih al-Bukhari, he used to write out the gospel in Hebrew. His authority to recognize a prophet came entirely from one source, his deep knowledge of the Christian and Jewish books. This is the hinge of everything that follows. Waraka's recognition of Muhammad was not a private intuition. It was a scriptural judgment, the judgment of a man reading Muhammad's experience through the lens of the Bible, which raises an unavoidable question. If we are to trust Waraka's reading of his Bible when it points toward Muhammad, what does that same Bible say about an angel who brings a new gospel? One clarification before we go further, because a defender of the tradition will want to drive a wedge here between the Injil the Qur'an honors and the gospel Waraka held. Some will say the Injil given to Jesus was lost, that what Christians carried was a different, corrupted thing. But a prophet's revelation is delivered, not lost. Jesus taught it to his disciples, or he was no prophet, and Islam will not call him that. The disciples wrote it down within the 1st century, and that scripture has been in continuous Christian hands, unbroken, from then to the 7th century and beyond. And the Quran itself commands the Christians of Muhammad's day to uphold and judge by the Injil they possessed, a present book, not a lost one. There is no gap in the record where a lost original could hide. The Injil the Quran honors is the gospel Christians held, and the gospel Christians held contained Galatians. Among the books Waraka knew was a letter written by the Apostle Paul to the churches of Galatia, roughly the year 50, some 5.5 centuries before the cave. Now, many Muslims hold that Paul himself was the corrupter, that he bent the message of Jesus into something Jesus never taught. That is a serious objection, and we take it up directly in the next film. For this film, set it to one side and simply ask what Paul's letter says. Paul was writing to warn those churches against anyone who would alter the gospel they had received. And in so doing, he set down one of the most absolute statements in all of Christian scripture. Read it slowly. Notice first who the we is. Paul means the apostles themselves, the original founders of the church. He is setting the bar so high that even his fellow apostles, even a heavenly messenger, would fall under the curse if they brought a contrary gospel. No authority is exempt. That is the whole point of the verse. And he does not merely warn against false human teachers. He raises the bar as high as it can go. Even an angel from heaven, if such a messenger brings a gospel contrary to the one already preached, the verdict is the same. Let him be accursed. In the original Greek, the word is anathema, the strongest term of rejection the language possesses. Not mistaken, not unreliable, accursed. And Paul says it twice. In the very next verse, he repeats it. that someone, someday, would need to hear it again. Now consider the claim at the heart of Islam. Muhammad said his revelation was brought by an angel, one the Islamic tradition itself identifies as Jibril, its name for the same Gabriel of the Bible. This is the tradition's own identification, not ours. The Qur'an affirms in chapter 53 that what Muhammad received was taught to him by one mighty in power, an angel from heaven bringing a gospel. This is not an approximation of the scenario Paul describes. It is the scenario Paul describes, exactly, and the gospel that angel brought contradicts the one Paul preached. The Qur'an denies that Jesus was crucified. It denies that he was divine. It denies the Trinity. On the central claims of Paul's gospel, the Qur'an does not adjust, it reverses. So we arrive at the dilemma, and this time it does not lie between Islam and Christianity. It lies inside Waraka himself. Waraka endorsed Muhammad. Waraka believed the Bible. Either his endorsement was consistent with his Bible, or it was not. But before we open that fork, we have to close a door an honest critic will reach for. Someone may say, perhaps Waraka belonged to a heterodox Christian sect, a Judeo-Christian group that never accepted Paul, and for whom Galatians was not scripture at all. If so, the anathema would not bind him, and the dilemma dissolves. It is a fair objection, and the answer comes not from us, but from the Islamic sources themselves. The Islamic tradition does not describe Waraka as a member of some lost sect with its own private books. It describes him as a man who wrote out the gospel, the scriptures recognized as the gospel, and who recognized Muhammad's experience through the mainstream scriptural pattern of Moses and the Namus. That is the only Waraka the sources give us, and the gospel recognized in his world was the apostolic scripture that carries Paul's letters within it. So the objection produces a sub-dilemma of its own. If yes, if he was the credentialed scholar of the gospel that the tradition celebrates, then his Christianity contains Paul, and the anathema applies. If no, if he belonged to some sect the sources never mention, then he was not the authoritative scriptural witness the tradition relies on to make his endorsement weighty, and the whole reason his word counted falls away. The apologist cannot have the credentialed witness and the convenient sect at the same time. With that door closed, the main fork stands. If Waraka's endorsement was consistent with his Christianity, then Galatians somehow does not apply to Muhammad's angel. But Galatians names exactly this case, an angel from heaven, a contrary gospel. There is no honest reading of those words under which the angel of a gospel that denies the cross could be welcomed. To make Waraka consistent, the verse must be made to mean the reverse of what it says. But if Waraka's endorsement was not consistent with his Christianity, if he failed to apply the very scripture he was famous for knowing, then his recognition of Muhammad was either uninformed or mistaken. And remember, his scriptural knowledge was the entire reason his word carried weight. Take that away, and the first endorsement of Muhammad's prophethood is the judgment of a man contradicting his own books. Either Waraka's Bible blesses the angel, which it does not, or Waraka endorsed an angel his own Bible calls accursed. There is no third reading of Galatians 1:8. 4 responses are available to the defender of the tradition. Each deserves a fair hearing. First, that Waraka was inspired beyond Paul, that he saw a truth Paul had missed. But this makes Waraka a recipient of divine guidance, a kind of prophet, a claim no Islamic source makes, and it offers no principle for accepting his reading of Moses while rejecting Paul's plain words. It rescues the story only by inventing an authority for Waraka that the tradition never granted him. Second, that Galatians refers only to false human teachers, not to real angels. But the verse explicitly names an angel from heaven. Paul raised the bar to that height on purpose, precisely because an angelic claim is the hardest to refute. The passage anticipates the exact scenario Muhammad would later describe. Third, that the Bible was corrupted and Galatians is not authentic. We will return to this response in the next film because it carries a hidden cost. For now, note only this. Waraka was working from the scriptures recognized in his world as the gospel. That is what the Islamic sources themselves claim. If those were corrupted, then his recognition of Muhammad rested on corrupted books, and his endorsement collapses with them. Fourth, that Waraka died before the contrary content of the Qur'an was revealed, and so cannot be bound by it. This is the most honest response, but it does not help. If Waraka endorsed an angel whose message he never heard, before the denials of the cross, the divinity, the Trinity were ever spoken, then he certified something he had no knowledge of. That is not recognition. That is a guess in the dark. None of the four removes the dilemma. They relocate it or they deepen it. Waraka ibn Nawfal spent his life inside one book. He wrote it out. He taught from it. He died believing it. And in that book, written 5 centuries before the cave, a sentence was already waiting about an angel from heaven, a contrary gospel, and a curse for the one who brings it. Read at face value, that sentence falls on the angel Waraka endorsed. To lift it, the book must be made to say the opposite of its plainest words, by the very man who knew it best. The choice belongs to the believer. The sentence belongs to the record. If what we share here strengthens your understanding, kindly like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Share it forward so others can find clarity and truth. It costs nothing, just a click, but your support means everything. You are part of this family.